Oh my God, this is amazing because I can't see any of you. I just see a big white light in front of me. Um, Calms the nerves just a little bit. Hi, y'all. I'm Kaliris, she, her, ella. And yes, today I want to talk to you a little bit about how I bridge some of the work that I do as a scholar and as an intellectual, but also how I bring that to neighborhoods, to communities, to classrooms. So we'll go to the next slide. So typically when I start my scientific talks, I say, I have nothing to disclose. Nobody's paying me to do anything. I'm not hired by some ed tech company or by MAP or iReady. That's not me. What I do want to disclose, though, is what I bring into this space is that I am the mother of 2 public school students. As AJ mentioned, one of them is in a consortium school, School of the Future. He has an IEP, so I am a proud mom of a neurodivergent 14-year-old who has challenged me in all the ways. I'm also the lucky mom of a 6-year-old who attends Central Park East 1 Elementary School. And my amazing District 4 Superintendent is also in this room, Dr. Christy de la Cruz, so shout out to the amazing leaders that we have in the New York City Public Schools, including Alan. I'm a neuroscientist. I spent a lot of time going to school, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I got there, but I bring that into the space as well. It really made Dan Weisberg really angry when I would question prepackaged curriculum and faux screeners, because I was like, I want to see the data, bro. Where is it? And don't send me the data from iReady, because I already know what they're going to tell me. I am an educator, so I'm a medical educator. I'm currently at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, but I've taught everything from college now into medical and graduate education. So I do believe in creating deeply meaningful educational experiences for all people, and understanding development is key in terms of how we engage with each other and how we engage with young people and provide optimal learning environments. And I have contributed to policies in the Department of Education. The ones that you don't like, I didn't do. The ones that we're trying to implement, revolutionize, those I'm working on, I promise. Next slide. So, of course, we start every talk with an outline or learning objectives. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my story and how I believe that multilingualism is so incredibly important, not just as a person, but also for the brain to be adaptive and flexible. It's one of the key ways that we can support neural maturation of the brain. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about optimal learning environments. What talk does a neuroscientist make if she doesn't have brain scans? And how to engage in, again, developmentally meaningful, optimal learning environments for diverse populations. And then I have some asks for you, or things that we want to remember as we continue to engage in our practices. It's really hard to stand behind a podium. Maybe I'll do this. Okay, next slide. So this is when I absolutely embarrassed myself. I wanted you to see, I was born on the island of Puerto Rico. Like to say born, raised, and educated. Absolute fan of Bad Bunny, so whoever's having a Super Bowl party, hit me up later. But the people that formed me are these 2 amazing humans here on the left, Dr. Doris Ramirez Soto and Dr. Salvador Salas, first generation PhDs. I am an experiment of nature versus nurture, and I was in a classroom from the moment I was born. So guess what? I had to be some form of educator. And so my mom, her family was the one that was a predominant presence in my life. So here are my grandparents. My grandmother was a cafeteria lady in a public school, a local public school. And my grandfather was a veteran of the Korean War who had a stroke and lived as a disabled person for the rest of his life. But we started our lives in Puerto Rico, and at the age of 5, my parents told me, we're gonna go move to New Jersey to get a PhD. And I was like, what the hell are you people doing? And they actually, it was funny because they wanted to sell one of our cars, and I hid myself in the trunk of the car because I was like, whoever buys the car will just keep me in Puerto Rico and I won't have to move to this place called New Jersey. that didn't really work. They didn't take me. But coming from Puerto Rico, while most of our schools do provide bilingual education, I was 5 and my parents were native Spanish speakers, and I didn't really know the language and I didn't know what we were getting into. But we ended up moving to New Jersey. Next slide. And it was my introduction to public schools. And I will say it was one of the most beautiful experiences that I had. I came into the system as an English language learner, and by the end of first grade, I was at my reading level, those terms, anyway, by the end of first grade. And in third grade, I was admitted into the gifted program. Again, quotes. It was funny because I was actually really into music, so I played the violin in third grade, and then I started the saxophone in fourth grade. There you see me and my sister. And when I got the letter at home, because I was a latchkey kid, so I opened all the mail, I saw that I got this letter about being in a gifted program, and I was like, oh, dope, I must be playing my music really well. And next thing you know, they're pulling me out of my classroom to do problem-based learning. Oh my goodness, now I had the opportunity from 3rd to 5th grade to dissect frogs, to cut up eyeballs, to study minerals, experiences that the kids in my regular classroom were not having. And so I had this really rich experience that I didn't understand why other kids were not able to take part of, and there was only like 3 or 4 of us that were having this opportunity. So when we went back to Puerto Rico, I very much carried that curiosity, carried that creativity. My parents put us in a small private bilingual school because they didn't want us to lose out on our English. Little did they know that my cortex was already consolidated and I would never have an accent in English or Spanish, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so that kind of curiosity, drive, desire to engage in problem-based, inquiry-based education was very core and key to me, also because I saw what my parents were doing. Now, one of the big things that also happened during that time is all of this questioning. I remember now Chief of Staff Kenita Lloyd one time was like, Kaliris, you asked too many questions. That's what I was trained to do, ask questions. I questioned my father, like, what are we doing here in New Jersey? It's cold, and we could be home in the beach with family. And he told me very explicitly, he's like, your mom and I are here to get the highest degree that you can get in science and in education, and so that we can change the way the world sees something. And that stuck with me. The fact that he could even say that was wild to me. And I was like, okay, I think that's what I want to do. I want to change the way the world sees something. And so I've carried that with me through my practice. So from this point forward, I'm going to talk to you about some of the evidence that supports all of your practices. I don't think I'm going to tell you anything that you don't already know, but I am going to show you data. I'm going to show you some brain scans to continue to affirm your practices. And if you're new to this space, hopefully these are things that you can take with you so that we can continue to develop the minds of young people. Those folks at the corner, that was when I defended my dissertation, which focused on adolescence, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Next slide. So language is incredibly important. Again, it allows for us to be able to become adaptive, our brain to become adaptive. One thing that's really critical about the introduction of language is that the earlier that we do it, the earlier that we immerse young people in diverse languages, the more flexible our brain becomes. And we see this through very specific areas of the brain that become activated when we're engaging in language processing. Now, I was really intentional about using these scans in particular because this was a study that was done looking at young learners as they're reading. Have we all heard about the science of reading? and how it's been co-opted and corporatized so that we can sell prepackaged curriculum. That part. I just want you to know that yes, there are language centers that are activated while we read. A lot of them have to do with motor regulation, right? Being able to move all of the muscles in your face, in your mouth, to be able to generate some of that language. And there are two key areas of the brain that are associated with language. One is called Broca's area. Broca's area is responsible for the production of speech. And the other one is called Wernicke's area. Wernicke's area is responsible for the understanding of speech. These are really important for us because when people have strokes and they can't produce any language, or they just tell you words without any meaning, we know where those strokes are, and we could use those two areas of the brain to relate that back to where the damage is, so we're able to support a patient. We didn't connect that to young people until recently, as we're talking about, again, literacy, and the things that we want to do in order to support literacy in our young people. So those key areas are really important. They're the ones that light up. Now what we see, if you could just hit the slide one more time, is if we're looking at the connections, there's an animation, another image that's supposed to come up. If we look at the connections between these different neural structures, nothing is happening. There we go. If you look at the bottom here, here on the left, we have a monolingual brain. This is an English speaker. And here are the connections between those neural structures that are responsible for language production, language understanding, and then motor areas that, again, are going to facilitate the movement of those muscles. On the right, you're going to see two bilingual brains. The one on top is a native English speaker that learned Spanish. The one on bottom is a native Spanish speaker that learned English. Now, what I want you to look at is those connections, and I don't know if you could see it in the back, and I can't move to the slide to point to you, but the one on the bottom, the native Spanish speaker that then learned English, we have really strong connections between those neural structures that are for understanding, for the production of language, and those motor centers. This adaptability and flexibility that occurs in the bilingual brain is one that we take with us as we move forward. It enhances our ability to produce, right? As we're learning how to read in diverse languages, our brain has the ability to tap into that information, strengthen those circuits, and expand our vocabulary as we move forward. So today, as we celebrate our students that have this seal of biliteracy, we recognize the fact that their brains are engaging in active adaptation and can strengthen those connections by learning new languages. We also know that with a brain that continues to age, multilingualism can also be protective of the brain. So individuals, for example, that suffer from neurodegenerative conditions, so if you have a history of Alzheimer's, for example, in your family, a multilingual brain, those cognitive deficits come at a much slower rate than those that have monolingual brains, for example. We could talk about that later on in the breakout groups. So super important also in terms of identity formation, who we are, what we do. I will never, I shared my story about being from Puerto Rico and knowing Español and being an active speaker because that was central to my identity and me being able to be in multicultural spaces and create these connections with community. Next. So from there, I wanted to shift to understanding how we create deep learning experiences. So this is a study that was done on young learners, right? A lot of studies in helping us trying to differentiate what's the difference between a neurodivergent brain and a more typical brain. This study was done with 3- and 4-year-olds, and they were trying to look at what happens with memory acquisition. How many new objects can you introduce in a 3- and 4-year-old to help them retain that information? And so 3- and 4-year-olds, in a matter of 15 minutes, you can introduce 1 to 2 objects, and what you see is a lighting up of neural centers that are responsible for higher order cognitive thinking. So you'll hear a lot about a structure called the prefrontal cortex, reasoning, judgment, executive function. And you'll also see structures that are associated to spatial orientation. So the posterior parietal lobe is another structure, as well as the visual cortex, which is in the back of your brain. A lot of these neural centers are really key and important, again, for memory formation. And sometimes we're able to distinguish, as you know in your assessments, the differences between different aspects of cognitive thinking. So if it's visual memory, if it's spatial memory, if it's executive function, if it's reference memory, we're able to differentiate depending on which structures of the brain are being activated. What's really important for a child to be able to remember things, not just a child, adults as well, is when you have deep learning. Content is not it. It's the ability to think deeply, as Superintendent Chen just mentioned, critically, unpacking all of the things that come up with that. It's also the social interaction and the social environment that's created for that child to be able to engage in that learning. I keep saying child. I also have to do this with my adults in medical education, and so it's absolutely key for these different centers. The other thing that has been co-opted is this concept of accelerated learning, right? We hear that from some people that are pushing for gifted and talented. Accelerated learning really means having a multisensory experience. It's having the ability to engage with materials. It's having the ability to engage with a problem, right? One of the things that I love, for example, about Central Park East 1 is that my child learns how to cook banana muffins in kindergarten. And so having the ability to say, oh, I changed this thing about a recipe and I put in an extra cup of salt and this thing was like nasty because it was salty, gives them the ability to understand not just how to read a recipe, but also how to engage with math. And he also remembers that it was not a good taste to have too much salt in banana muffins. And that particular experience, again, will help consolidate that information in a much quicker way. So providing these multisensory experiences are really important for memory consolidation, and it facilitates that process of learning. Next. So what's critical is what you all do, and you already know. Play-based, problem-based curricula are the one that enriches children's environment and adults' environment. In medical education, 60% of my class has to be problem-based, case-based. We don't do lectures anymore. And the lectures that they do get, they don't necessarily have to come into the classroom to engage in that. It's all about how do we engage in this multimodal, multisensory experience, which you cannot have if you have worksheets on desks, in rows, and you're not talking to each other. So, thank you for that. So again, the prefrontal cortex is going to be key for developing that reasoning, that judgment, that personality, and it's going to be activated during these times. Another thing that really facilitates that is centering experiences that enhance curiosity and creativity. What that does is that it increases a neurotransmitter in the brain called dopamine. Dopamine is my favorite neurotransmitter. And dopamine is what tells you that you're engaging in a pleasurable experience. And so when you have a cold glass of water on a hot day, when you have a burger and because you're starving, dopamine is released in your brain. So do other substances. It releases dopamine in your brain too. But there are such things like natural rewards, and we can enhance that in our classrooms every single day. That dopamine, that release of dopamine, that feeling of joy and pleasure will help motivate and drive behavior, right? And so one of the things that we naturally do as human beings is we are seeking, and a lot of you have learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Just in terms of other ways to talk about it, we have 3 main basic needs as human beings: physiological needs, psychological needs, and social needs. Those 3 things are going to activate, when we're deprived of that, it's going to activate a psychological drive to engage in what's called goal-directed behaviors. How do I get rid of this tension that I have in my body and in my brain? When engaging in these creative, expansive experiences, we enhance that that increase of dopamine, that activation of the prefrontal cortex. And so in turn, people learn how to engage and satisfy those particular needs. The other key structure in the brain that's really important for different aspects of learning and memory is the hippocampus, which is mentioned here. The hippocampus is a structure in the brain that is known as what is called a neurogenic zone. New neurons are born there. We don't have a lot of structures in the brain that consistently has those new neurons. Those new neurons will integrate information, and what will happen is that once that neuron is fully formed, it gets incorporated into neural circuits in the brain. It'll move to other cortical regions, and it'll help us tap into that information. Super important. A really key target also in neurodegenerative conditions. You'll hear about the hippocampus a lot. Important for us, particularly during critical periods, because during critical periods, like in gestation, right after you're born, and adolescence, more neurons are being born there. We can capitalize on that to help facilitate learning. We also have learned that neurons don't stop being born in the hippocampus. So for a really long time, people were like, if you don't use it, you lose it. We're never gonna get those neurons back. That paradigm has shifted. In adulthood, we also have neurons born in the hippocampus at a much slower rate, but we can still work with that in terms of interventions and engagement. That's why when people say, oh, if you can't read by 3rd grade, we can't do any interventions, God forbid, that's false, right? We had folks that were enslaved and learned how to read when they were 40. The hippocampus continues to have these neurons, and we can continue to integrate new information. And so having these kinds of experiences, problem-based, play-based curriculum is not just going to facilitate that learning, it's going to enhance attention, it's going to enhance concentration, it's going to increase executive function, and in addition to that, it's going to help consolidate those circuits that are involved in emotional and behavioral regulation, enhance that emotional IQ, as well as social-emotional learning. Next. And so what's really important is for us to be able to create authentic assessments that align with that, right? And that's where you come in, and that's why families like mine choose consortium schools, because we want our children to not just have this multi-sensory experience, this real life experience, and enhance and allow for their brains to grow.
So one of the deepest flaws, and I don't have to tell you, I've already been featured on the Post twice for saying that standardized tests are eugenics. I don't have to tell you how flawed standardized tests are. And you can even, if you want to, you can even look up the American Psychological Association that was key in the studies that produced standardized testing, released an apology in 2021, had a whole resolution about the harm of the racist practices that allowed folks to engage in standardized testing of children, and how it systematically has introduced these gatekeeping tools for institutions to leave out diverse populations, right? Including multilingual learners, including neurodivergent people, particularly Black and Latina people, particularly immigrant communities. And so with your ability to engage in these practices and do these types of authentic assessments, we have the ability to help promote this critical thinking and this growth. We have, it works. We have the ability to support that motivation and that drive so that we can create lifelong learners. It's really fascinating to me that I'm in the business to produce physicians and practitioners and social workers and teachers and psychologists in all these different ways. And I'm asking my students to consistently read something, go to talks, do all these things. But for the majority of their lives, they've been sitting in classrooms in rows doing worksheets. Are we really engaging in practices that produce folks that are college ready? We love to use that term, don't we? Pathways, yay. And so the ways that we're able to do that is by engaging in inquiry-based, play-based, problem-based learning, and engaging in performance-based assessments that allow for this critical thinking. The last thing I'm going to say about that is that it also facilitates a sense of autonomy, which is part of those social and psychological needs that I mentioned previously. one of the things that really heightens our sense of stress, that really drives us to engage in different behaviors, is that desire and need for control. And that desire and need of control, stability, consistency is absolutely critical in helping our students have that sense of autonomy, of I'm the one that's steering this ship, and while you're engaging and supporting them in terms of, again, the content and the background, their desire to be in the driver's seat, particularly during adolescence, is absolutely critical for them to continue to engage as lifelong learners. And so the last thing I'm going to talk about, I'm like giving you this is about adolescence. So like I said, developmentally meaningful. I know most of you are high school teachers. And I've spent about 25 years trying to figure out the adolescent brain. We're never going to be out of a job. It's kind of dope. And so it was pretty amazing to me that when I was in graduate school, a number of studies were released by a gentleman called Jay Geed from the National Institutes of Mental Health that finally said, guess what? Adolescence is a different kind of period in somebody's life. For the longest time, people thought, oh, once you reach your teenage years, yes, you have hormones, yes, secondary sexual characteristics, but the brain is pretty formed. That's not true. And so what we see, and hopefully the movie will play, this is a composite of different scans. As you see, the brain is turning blue. Roughly around when puberty hits, and yes, it is aligned with the release of gonadal hormones, the brain starts dramatically changing. So around ages of 9 to 11 in girls, 12 to 13 in boys, sorry guys, it is true, 2 years, a little bit later, your brain is a little different. Not worse, just different. I have 2 boys. But aligned with the hormones, your brain is growing, and the definition of adolescence is a transition from childhood to adulthood. What happens is that as your brain grows, you have the opportunity to engage in a whole bunch of different experiences that helps your brain consolidate the circuits that we consider to be adult typical, and that help you engage in reasoning and judgment, right? So if I put a 16-year-old in a video game and ask them to drive, right, and be careful with the red lights and making these turns, what we see is that teenagers, and you see this, I'm sure, every day. I know I see it every day in my house. They'll make decisions that are a little bit more impulsive. They'll be like, oh yeah, I see the light that's yellow, but you know what? I'll have a couple of seconds before it turns red. I'm just going to run the light. There are a bunch of studies to show that teenagers make many more mistakes than children, younger children, or adults. Because this is a time in their life where their brain is so big and it could take in so much information that they're going to engage in these different types of behaviors to test and try to see what can work out. And that's what makes their brain pretty remarkable. And so as they continue to age, their brain starts pruning and consolidating and organizing to become what we know is an adult typical brain. Now that process doesn't end. In women, it doesn't end until the ages of 22, 23. In men, it doesn't end until the ages of 25, 26, although some studies are now showing that even until our 30s, our brain is still consistently changing and establishing those adult typical circuits. When your friend makes a mistake, it might be that their brain is trying to figure things out. And so one of the things that it's critical about that is, one, now we know that adolescence is this critical, sensitive period where all of these things can change. But also in thinking about how society has changed, how we engage with each other has changed, how this social cognition changes throughout development. And we start thinking about COVID and social isolation, and we start thinking about how young people are engaging more with social media. What are some of the things that are happening? The other thing I will say about adolescence is that during adolescence, that dopaminergic system is also getting organized, is also changing. And so they feel that pleasure with less stimulus more than adults, right? And so We have a lot of young people that are like thrill seekers and looking for that dopamine surge. And social media is providing that dopamine surge for them right now. That fast pace, those short clips. I was sharing yesterday with our current chancellor when we were talking about, we had a parent meeting, and we were talking about how young people are having a tougher time reading whole books. I'm seeing that in medical school. My medical students would prefer to see a 15-minute clip on how the brain works rather than engaging with textbooks. And so again, what are we doing to service providers and the knowledge that they have? So all of these neurotransmitters are in place, all of these organizational effects throughout adolescence are happening, and we're at a critical time to introduce these learning environments for children and to counter some of the effects that social media is having on their brains. And so the last thing I want to touch on is in the next slide, is a lot of us are talking about AI, and I'm sure you've gotten a couple of messages from our superintendent as well about the use of AI. But it wasn't until recently that studies are showing how AI can dramatically impact the brain, right? A lot of us we're thinking about AI as a tool. And there's so many layers to this, but I'm going to solely talk about the impact on the brain. All of the things that I just told you that we can do through play, through inquiry-based, problem-based practices are all countered by AI. So this is a study that was done on young people that were asked to do a writing task. And so some had the ability to engage with AI. The other group, the control group, had the ability to engage with just Google. Like, I'm just going to look for information and write my essay based on information that I have. And so they did what's called an electroencephalogram. So they put electrodes all over your brain to look at brain activity throughout the brain and did this particular task. So what they saw was that the use of ChatGPT while trying to writing, right? AI is writing this essay for these people, reduced every aspect of cognitive function that you can in the brain. Critical thinking, language centers that we just talked about, creativity and agency, lack of desire to engage with other people, so no agency, no autonomy. And it increased a sense of need of cognitive dependency. And it's almost like saying, well, AI is actually leaving us with a cognitive debt. It is not allowing our brains to evolve. It is not allowing our brains to engage in critical thinking. It is not allowing our brains to build on that social cognition that we so desperately need in order to satisfy all of those needs that we have as humans. And so are we thinking critically about this use of AI, not just for our students, but also for ourselves? Because there's a bunch of platforms that are coming for you, and the DOE wants to pay millions of dollars for these platforms. And so that's why it's so important to engage with folks on the PEP. Wink, wink. Next meeting is next week on Wednesday at Staten Island, if anybody wants to go. Anyway, the other thing that we know is that AI, because it is powered by information, right, from people in the world and from ed tech and companies, that it introduces racial bias, right? And so it is innately, organically racist. And so that you might have read several studies or several articles that have said even young people that have used AI for feedback, the feedback that comes back is racist, right? It's because it has this generative aspect to it and it can talk back to you. Some young people are using it to engage in relationships, right? And it creates hallucinations and altered reality, which could lead to other mental health conditions, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to belabor the point. But really important, again, as we're thinking about the direction of education and what we're doing and what we're really trying to build in terms of the future of this country and the future of the world. Next. The next slide is going to be my asks for you. So as somebody that's going to get your students in the future, I'm going to ask that we continue to engage in practices that align with the human brain. So I just gave you a bunch of data, I showed you a bunch of scans, you're like, all right, cool, I kind of knew that, but it's nice to see the evidence. Please continue to do that. We have to continue to talk. My dream has always been, how do we get into collective spaces with educators, neuroscientists, psychologists, and healthcare practitioners so that we can provide the best learning environment for children. I want you to continue to build on authentic assessments. Let's keep fighting for doing away with the screeners and the standardized tests. The portrait of the New York State graduate is going to be critical for us in this moment in history to show that the practices that we've been engaging in are the ones that really lead to college readiness and to success in the future. Those of us that are in higher education already know that, right? And so continue to build with us and work with us so that we can resist any sort of reductive practices when thinking about children and the growth of the brain. Honor language and identity, right? We have to continue to talk about culturally responsive practices in our classrooms for our students so that they don't engage in harmful practices later on as future providers. Let's continue to celebrate the multilingualism and multiculturalism that exists in the world. Y'all, we gotta fight this AI stuff. So no more automatizing the way that we work. We have to continue to center our humanity and our deep thinking. That's one of the reasons that I have, for one, engaged in narrative medicine and continue to bring in the humanities. Even though I'm a neuroscientist and I'm going to tell you how the brain works and all the neurochemicals and the connections in the neurons, I'm still going to have you think, how is it that you show up in this space? And how is it that you connect with people? Because we're at the service of people. And we have to lead for democracy. I was just telling a friend of mine that I heard our chancellor and our mayor say, we're going to democratize mayoral control. Mayoral control means one person is in charge. Don't know how you democratize that. But as we continue to embody the example of what it's like to lead, let's do that first with our young people in our classrooms and allow them to have their voice, their sense of belonging, their sense of identity, and their full selves. One of the reasons I have chosen progressive schools for my children is because my oldest continues to tell me, Mommy, I trust my adults and I always feel seen. And that's why I will always, always throw down for our progressive schools. Because if my big boy, my neurodivergent black baby, says, Mommy, I feel seen and I can do whatever I want to do. He thinks he's going to be the youngest mayor of New York City, just to let you know. Then I'm going to rock with you all day, every day. So let's continue to build on that. I have one more slide, because of course I have to let you know the amazing people that have built that. I have one more story. So I served on the admissions committee for the Sophie Davis School of Biomedical Education, not engineering, but that's okay, which is now the CUNY School of Medicine, for 12 years and met tons of amazing young people that wanted to be practitioners. I don't know how a 16-year-old knows that they want to be a doctor, but these kids knew it. And I recall interviewing a student 3 years ago from University Heights, one of the high schools here. And as I'm talking to this young person, they say to me, I don't know if I'm ready for medical school. I know all these other kids that, go to Stuyvesant and Townsend Harris, and, they're ready for these standardized tests, and that's not what I did. And I was like, oh, baby. I was like, you know what? Tell me a little bit about your last PBAT. So they shared, and I was like, I'm going to let you know that's exactly what you're going to do when you walk in the door. We're going to do performance-based assessments here. We're going to do problem-based assessments. You're going to be dealing with cases. And then, by your second year, you're going to be in the clinic dealing with people. And that is not standardized. And so I need you to center your experience that you had at University Heights. I need you to bring that into this space and show the couple of kids that come from Sty and from Brooklyn Tech what it's really like to engage in a holistic education. And so I have been fortunate to be in these spaces with these young people that have helped me understand how to be a better educator, how to be a better parent, how to be a better practitioner, how to be a better scientist. And so it is an absolute privilege to be with you today. And please continue to do what you're doing. And please continue to center that love and that joy and that transformation that we can create in our classrooms. Thank you.